Oh yeah. Oh, you're my fan. You're my fan. Todo fue chévere allá.
Can you hear me? Oh, now you can. Okay. Now I'm hoping that nothing goes wrong. But Murphy's Law is like this, and it might. Anyway, let's start and then we'll figure this out. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this special occasion in which we welcome Professor Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa to the University of Puerto Rico. We're very honored with your presence. Very happy to see you here. We have people in the audience in Sala, and we also have people connected through the Facebook page of our college, of the College of Humanities. So I would like to begin with inviting the Dean of Graduate Studies of the College of Humanities. You had another hat before. Dr. Aurora Lazardo to give her greeting.
Muy buenos días. A nombre de la decana de la Facultad de Humanidades, la doctora Agnes Bosch, quien me dio permiso para dar este saludo porque para mí es muy especial. Les doy la bienvenida a esta su casa, la Facultad de Humanidades, a los estudiantes, colegas, docentes y escritores que nos acompañan esta mañana y muy en especial a todas las personas que han colaborado para que esta actividad se pueda realizar, que han corrido con contratos, que han corrido con papeles, con juramentaciones y todos esos documentos que nos piden para poder hacer estas actividades. Muchas gracias a los coordinadores de esta actividad. Sobre todo, le doy la bienvenida a la distinguida y premiada autora Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa, por quien siento una inmensa admiración profesional y un más inmenso aún afecto personal. A través de sus novelas Daughters of the Stone y A Woman of Endurance, que tuve el privilegio de traducir al español, Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa ha creado un universo de personajes entrañables, algunos un poco detestables, que nos cuentan la historia de nuestro país y los los lazos que nos unen con África, desde la necesaria perspectiva de las personas esclavizadas, en especial las mujeres esclavizadas, cuya vida se puede resumir en esa última oración tan hermosa de A Woman of Endurance. It has been such a long journey, and these people, her new family, have taught her the greatest lesson of all, how to endure. Thank you, Dahlma, for rescuing and telling us these stories of resistance. And thank you for being yourself a woman of endurance.
I do have to acknowledge the fact, actually, that our dear friend, Dr. Lausardo, is the official translator of Professor Llanos-Figueroa's second novel, The Woman of Endurance. And her translation won the prestigious International Latino Books Award in 2 categories. She won gold medal for Best Fiction Book Translation, English to Spanish, and a bronze medal in the category of Best Novel, Historical Fiction, Spanish. So that round of applause is for you, Aurora. We're very proud of your work, and also in appreciation to Professor Llanos-Figueroa's writing as well. So we have 2 prize-winning people in our audience today. We have one more greeting by the coordinator of the graduate program in the Department of English, Dr. Patrick Andrés Mater.
Thank you. So as Dr. Rivera said, I'm Patrick Mater. I'm the graduate coordinator in the English department, and on behalf of the PhD program in the literatures and languages of the Anglophone Caribbean, I wish to thank Professor Llanos-Figueroa for accepting our invitation. It's a rare delight, and I'm happy to know that we also have the official translator of her work. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and I'm happy also that this will be live on Facebook. So I'll leave Rivera to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Professor Mater. I also wish to acknowledge that the event, as Professor Mater says, is possible through funding from our doctoral program of the English department, directed by Dr. Richard Swope, who is here also in our audience. Thank you, Dr. Swope. The event is also co-sponsored by several departments, the Department of Comparative Literature, the Women and Gender Studies program, and the Proyecto de Diversificación Académica en Estudios de Afrodescendencia y Racialización, a long title, in the College of General Studies. So I wish to thank Dr. Miriam Polgil, Dr. Alexandra Pagan, Dr. Marlac Pagan, and Dr. Mayra Santos Febres, and appreciate their collaboration with this visit. Last but not least, the incomparable Dr. Elidio Latorre Lagares, who is in the audience, an accomplished writer himself who just met Dahlma and helped in the coordination and promotion of the presentation with so much enthusiasm and kindness. Gracias, Elidio. We have been very busy these days with a lot of wonderful writers who have come to Puerto Rico. So I thank you very much. And special thanks to Jose Robledo, who was here and went out and will come back, for helping us with the technical aspects of the presentation, recording and live streaming. And a warm welcome to all the audience members, faculty members, undergraduate and graduate students joining us, family members in the audience today, especially Professor Llanos-Figueroa's husband, actually, photographer over here, Jonathan Liss. So a round of applause for the husband. It's always good to have the husband around. And finally, bienvenida a nuestra universidad, Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa. We receive you with a big round of applause. Please allow me to share some brief biographical information on our guest of honor, and then she will take over the podium. Dahlma was born in Puerto Rico and raised in New York City. As my students know, we talk about this a lot, right, in our class on diasporic Puerto Rican writers. She is a product of the Puerto Rican communities on the island and in the South Bronx. She attended the New York City public school system and received her academic degrees from the State University of New York at Buffalo and Queens College, City University of New York. As a child, as many of us have had the same experience, she was sent to live with her grandparents in Puerto Rico, where she was introduced to the culture of rural Puerto Rico, including the storytelling that came naturally to the women of her family. Much of her work is based on the experiences during that time. Dahlma has taught creative writing and language and literature in the New York City public school system before becoming a young adult librarian. She has also taught creative writing to teenagers, adults, and even senior citizens throughout New York while honing her own skills as a fiction writer and memoirist. The hardcover edition of her first novel, Daughters of the Stone, was listed as a 2010 finalist for the PEN Robert Bingham Prize. In 2020, the self-published paperback edition of the novel won the 16th Annual National Indie Excellence Award for Multicultural Fiction. In 2021, she was awarded the New York State Council for the Arts Artist Fellowship for Fiction, and also a City Artist Corps Grant and the Letras Boricuas Fellow. Her short stories appear in several anthologies, including Bronx Memoir Project, Latina Authors and Their Muses, Chicken Soup for the Latina Soul, Breaking Ground, Anthology of Puerto Rican Writers in New York, and Growing Up Girl. Dahlma's work has also appears in various literary magazines, such as the Afro-Hispanic Review and Coeli Journal. Her second novel, excuse me, A Woman of Endurance, was published in 2022 by Amistad, is available in hardcover and paperback editions, as well as the Spanish language translation, Indómita, by Harper Español. Dahlma has dedicated herself to her writing, speaking engagements, panels, workshops, conferences, and retreats that have taken her to different cities throughout the United States, Puerto Rico, Italy, Mexico, Russia, and Cuba, among other places. And today, the University of Puerto Rico is honored with her presence. It is my distinct pleasure to present Professor Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa.
Thank you so much. Suena como mucho, ¿no? Ella leyó muchas cosas ahí. My presentation will be threefold. I will read a short essay on why I write. Then we'll talk a little bit about the world that I created in my narratives. Daughters of the Stone was the first novel. The second novel in the series is A Woman of Endurance. I am now writing the third novel, which is Of Mothers and Daughters. It was supposed to be one, but then people started saying, "Well, ¿y qué le pasó a tal y cual? And what happened to this one? And what happened to that? And why did you kill this one?" And I realized that the story of this particular group of characters, this Afro-Boricua world, could not be told in 300 pages, that it needed more, that we needed more. And so I ended up with a plan for 5 novels. I hope I live long enough to write them, but anyway, that's the plan. So this will be an introduction to this world that I created, partially based on Puerto Rican history and partially based on my own family history. And then I'll read an excerpt from A Woman of Endurance, and then we'll chat, okay? And I realized after that introduction that you see me standing here by myself, but I feel all the people behind me that got me to this place on this day, which is a very special time for me, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway, why I write. I was born into a world of stories full of color, warmth, tragedy, and humor. I was born into a world of music and art and intuitive knowing. I was taught at home that I must be true to my feelings and that those feelings will never lead me astray. Excuse me. But when I went to school, I was told that reason and logic were the only acceptable ways of knowing. Emotions clouded reality. Definitions had to be exact, measurable, black and white, no in-betweens. Keep it simple, I was told. There were other silent messages. My language was not good enough. My looks were not good enough. My ways of knowing were not good enough. But what about, let's not complicate the situation, I was told. Keep it simple, I was told. You're an American now. I tried. I really tried to be what my teachers wanted me to be. I tried to see the world through their eyes. I watched television every night and tried to be like the children in that box. I read every book given to me and I watched every movie I could, but I never quite found myself in any of it. I did not fit. After years of trying to fit into the picture that I was given, I finally came to my own simple truth. I was not simple. I was a Black Puerto Rican female in a world that insisted that I be one or the other, and they valued none of those parts of me. It wasn't that I didn't fit into the picture, but that the picture didn't fit me. So I rejected what I was told, and I began to write my world my way. I write first and foremost because the stories I grew up reading in school bore no resemblance to the world of my family and my community. Those stories did not tell of the lines of my grandmother's face or the smell on my abuelo's skin when he came in from the cane fields. Nowhere did I see my family's many shades of brown or the sound of my mother's voice when she calls me mamita. I write because those images will not allow me to be silent. I write because my ancestors were never allowed a public voice, and now that I have claimed that voice, I feel a mandate to make public the stories that they only whispered in private. I write because those images will not allow me to be silent. I write to give voice and face to the lives that were never recorded or even recognized. I write for my family, for our youth, our community, our survival. I write for my own sanity and my ability to say finally and unequivocally, this is who I am and this is where I came from. And yes, I am an integral part of the many colored fabrics of the American quilt. Thank you. Okay, so I don't have to explain this map to you. I had to do a great deal of research because Puerto Rican history is not taught in the United States. So I had to pick and choose what I needed for my fiction. I am not a historian. I based my fiction on historical truth. But when that truth didn't fit in, I discarded it. Because the reality is that history is written by conquerors. And my people were not the conquerors. So they had no voice. So anyway, this is historically accurate. My novel is set in the northeast section of the island in the coast. If you look at the brown in the center is the sugar producing part of the island. The green around the coast is the sugarcane area, and the rest are minor products and other industries. So because my story is about sugarcane and the manufacture of products of sugarcane, and the lives of the people who created it, it is a coastal story. So this is a presentation that I give to people who don't necessarily know anything about our island. I assume everything I just said you already know, so we'll move on. Se quedó. I was afraid of this, technical difficulties.
If anyone is technologically savvy, please come up right now.
See, he is, I've been photographer and
Yes.
technological
Thank you.
person. Comes in handy. It should be this. Babe? This shouldn't be there. I'm up to the second one. It froze us. Audio. What happened? ¿El muchacho no está aquí?
No. That's it.
Okay, exit.
It's this is what they brought.
That's exit. Now we can go back. Algo pasó. Well, you know what? While we do this, why don't I read the excerpt? And then we can do the visual later. Okay, when you come.
Sorry about that.
So just to explain, let me sit down.
So you gotta turn the mic on.
Can I borrow your daughter's phone? Okay, so this is the first book, Daughters of the Stone, and it is a story about 5 generations in this Afro-Puerto Rican family from capture in West Africa to colonial Puerto Rico to urban United States. So it's about 150 years in this book. One of the characters in this book is called Paula, and Paula has no patience. And she is obnoxious, and every time she opens her mouth, it's a problem, right? So if somebody doesn't want to eat, Paula is the first person to say, no quiero comer, dámelo a mí, yo me lo como, you know? So she was a fairly negative character. Then I started writing A Woman of Endurance, and Paula is the main character. So now that I made her so obnoxious, how can I get the reader to be compelled by her, to care about her? So that was my first problem. Paula is an African woman who is purchased to be a breeder. At that point, Puerto Rico officially could not bring any more Africans to the island. Había mucho negro, tenían que buscar blanco porque la cosa estaba mala. So she was bought as a breeder. They couldn't bring in more Africans, but they could create more Africans, right? So as soon as these women had their babies, the babies were taken away and sold. And that is a historical fact, not necessarily in Puerto Rico because I could not find any reference telling me that this happened in Puerto Rico. But I did find plantation records that said that a sugarcane plantation went from buying 80% men and 20% women, enslaved people, to buying mostly women and no men. Now, what are you going to produce in a sugarcane plantation if you have no male workers, right? So I took what was not said and ran with it and made a story about it. Yes?
You wanna do this one since we have it working?
See, wow. Strike while the iron's hot.
Yes.
No sé qué pasó, se congeló. Bueno. Okay, I wanted to share this picture with you because this is a picture of plantation owners, the elites. When one of the research trips that we took to Puerto Rico, we went to Aguirre in the south of the island, and we went through the bush and everything and found the plantation and the whole thing. But this is an example of what the plantation owners would have looked like. And this is a rural plantation. Many families who owned large haciendas lived in San Juan, but they had a plantation house that they functioned, did business from. And this is that type of structure. In many of these types of homes, the enslaved people lived on the first floor and the family lived upstairs. Puerto Rico had smaller plantations than, let's say, Jamaica or Cuba or the United States, where they might have 400 enslaved people or more. Puerto Rico's plantations rarely had more than 40 or 50 workers. This is a family of Afrodescendientes in front of their choza. And I just wanted people to have an idea of what they look like. As I said, I'm sure most of you have seen these photos before, but it is how can I put it? An in-your-face introduction for someone who has only seen the beaches in Puerto Rico, or who have never been to Puerto Rico and only see postcards. I wanted to show them what the reality of being an enslaved person in the countryside in Puerto Rico looked like. Una carreta, taking the sugar cane to the train, to the railroad train. Lavando en la quebrada, right? I love this picture of a cane worker because you see the heaviness of his task. This is a man who's beaten down but yet standing up straight, you know, but you know he's had a hard life. Post-hurricane, hurricanes have always been in our history, have always been a destructive force, and yet I'm always amazed that we always get up and we rebuild and we try again. No matter how much toilet paper is thrown at us. I did not know about this type of transportation in Puerto Rico. This is in San Juan. Again, more as we move closer to the modern times, transportation modes changed. And of course, this is in the 1940s.
Yes.
So, this is the first kind of factory. In Daughters of the Stone and in all my books, there are places where women sew and they do embroidery and they do puntillo. And this was the first picture that I found. This is in the 1940s. Instead of women working in the home, now they go to a collective place. This is a good precursor to the 1950s, where there was a mass Puerto Rican migration to New York City, and our Puerto Rican seamstresses and embroiderers were the backbone of the garment industry in New York City. And they organized and they marched and they protested, and they were a very strong force in the manufacturing of clothing in New York City, which was a major industry. Now, that industry has been shipped overseas to China and other places. And so that group of people who fought for those rights are no longer necessary, right? Because the industries are not there anymore. So progress, supposedly. This is a view from El Barrio, from the train station. You see Midtown New York in the background, but in the foreground you see a working class community and a very vibrant working class community. And this is in the 50s. This was examples of living in Puerto Rican households in the Bronx and in Manhattan. As always, the family is the center and the backbone of the society. And the socializing, mira, compré una televisión, vengan para acá. And, you know, all these people are around this little television, right? As time has gone on, that little screen has become massive. But it was a way of socializing, a way of maintaining culture, a way of holding families, extended families together. This is more personal. This is the woman in the center is my mother. She was a nurse midwife in New York City. And many people's perception of the Puerto Rican migration is all of these people who have no skills. And that is not true. Many Puerto Ricans came here to the United States with skills, some already professionals, some came to graduate school. And so I wanted to show something that's counter the stereotype that none of us had anything to offer. All of us had much to offer on many levels. And this is a family portrait. Guess who the little girl is? I just wanted to show the voyage of at least my family and how we got to be where we ended up. My parents are now both gone. My brother lives in now Texas, and so things have changed, but I think that's the nature of modernity, right? As the elders pass on, the younger people kind of spread out and go wherever their work is, because that's what motivates our lives. So that's my gift to you, my family. Okay. And now just go straight to reading? Okay. So I'm going to read a part of the book. First of all, how many people have actually read this book, either Indómita or Woman of Endurance? Okay, so some of you have. For those of you who haven't, the book begins with Paula trying to escape a very abusive plantation situation. And I won't go into a lot of details, but this section is that beginning of the book, and it's called The Port of San Juan, November 1836. Page 41 if you have the book. And once or twice I'll skip a few words. I'll tell you why later. Anyway. When she was taken from home place, she had been Kira, a comely young woman with rounded hips, strong legs, and a flash of a smile. The woman who arrived on this other shore, this Puerto Rico, now named Paula by her captors, had 3 crooked fingers and 4 missing teeth, and had been brutalized by every member of the crew. After the full moon had come and gone 4 times, and the floating hell had made 3 stops, less than half of the original group of captives remained. Paula was taken to the upper deck for the last time. She had been below for so many weeks that the sun was blinding. When her eyes finally adapted to the light, she looked out onto a new world. This, it seemed, was her destination. Up and down the shoreline, a long line of ships had pulled up in a place where the sea had taken a huge bite out of the land. Wooden planks stretched from the ship to the shore. Paula and the rest of the captives were herded onto the deck under guard. Earlier, they had been hosed down and scrubbed clean under the careful eye of the crew. They were given makeshift clothes that barely covered their nakedness. Women were given cloths to cover their tangled hair. Men were shorn of their matted beards and their heads were shaven. Food had become more plentiful in the past few weeks, and now they were fed a last meal on board. During the voyage, they had been separated by gender, but now they were chained in specific configurations, including men, women, and young boys. The group was suddenly in the midst of more commotion than Paula had seen since leaving home. Unchained, shirtless black men toiled in the morning sun. Most of these workers took care not to look at the captives directly as they stood in rags and chains. The workers simply walked by, intent on unloading the crates, which were then taken to the squat buildings lining the shore. Some stepped carefully around the chained group, hoisting large, oddly shaped bundles and huge stacks that went directly to the waiting wagons. Not one of them said a word, pretending not to notice the band of half-naked, bony black people, mostly men, who stood to one side. One young boy tripped, dropping his load, and bent down to retrieve it. As he stood up again, he looked directly into Paula's eyes for a moment. She stared back and held his gaze. There, she read all she needed to know about his life, and she could see that he read all he needed to know about hers. Paula recognized the sadness she felt pressing against her eyes, alive in his. His was an infinitesimal nod. She slowly pulled at the rag that barely covered her naked breast. Someone called. The boy was jostled. The moment passed, and they went on to face their lives in this place that neither of them have chosen. The ship had slipped in between dozens of others that had already dropped anchor or were moored at the harbor. Their masts, a collection of sticks prodding the low-swung blanket of clouds. As she stood waiting for the non-human cargo to be offloaded, Paula was shocked by the number of people who filled the area below. It seemed that in this place, the market was right on the shoreline, as though the people couldn't wait until the merchants got to the village center to hold the sales. But before she could observe much else, a strong jerk on her arm commanded her attention. She was being pulled onto a narrow plank of wood that led from the vessel to the shore. Chained to a line of men and women, she cringed as she imagined one of them slipping and all of them drowning amid the waterlogged, rotting flotsam between the ship and the dock. Decaying food, dead animals, and human waste filled the air with a choking stench. The babble that rose around them as they stood on the pier was deafening. It sounded like no speech Paula had ever heard, the words jagged, grating sounds that attacked the ear. She realized that she was listening not to one, but to many different languages, and recognized an odd word or two of the language of her captors. Their language was as offensive as their behavior. Then Paula's eyes fell on the white women in the crowd. They wore long dresses, covering them from neck to foot, many pointing into boxes, picking their way through open packages, cloth, containers, fruit, fish, metal, tools, and figurines being sold right from the waterfront. She noticed that some of the women had straw-colored hair hanging down to their shoulders. They carried little umbrellas and they wore round boxes on their heads with thin knitting floating over their faces. Paula was reminded of the beaded and colorful masks worn by believers dancing for the gods back home. But these paled by comparison. They were colorless and flimsy. There was nothing ceremonial about the movements of these women who were focused on grabbing and exchanging paper for the objects before them. White men stood by waving sticks and gesturing to the black bare-breasted men who hoisted and heaved rope cargo. From the bridge, they had looked like black worker ants, running back and forth around the freight that had already been unloaded. But up close, Paula could see the weariness, the straining bodies, smell the sweat of the laborers who, much like herself, had no time to care for themselves. The line of captives snaked through the harbor crowds and to an open area full of men in hats who stood yelling and waving their arms, laughing and passing jugs around. She was herded into a corner of the square to await her turn at the stake in the center, where one captive after another was exhibited to the men waving the pieces of paper. There was much back and forth, and then papers changed hands and the purchase was dragged away. When it was her turn to stand at the block, Paula was released from her chains and dragged up to the platform to the pole, where she was tethered once again. Mother Yemaya, where are you when I need you most? Paula closed her eyes. She thought about all that had already been taken from her. Her lovely fingers, her teeth, her body, her untouched womanhood, her laughter. But they hadn't taken everything. She clung to her faith, her soul, and her secret. The seed that she knew was growing deep inside her. She smelled tobacco, sweat, and rancid breath as fingers poked, hands examined her scalp, squeezed her breast, and slapped her buttocks. Someone pulled back her lip and dug into her mouth. She bit down as hard as she could. The loud male cry was followed by a stinging slap that knocked her down, leaving her hanging from the ropes that bound her to the stake. She was dragged up again, and then the hands rubbed her belly and below, digging and jabbing at her bruised insides. Men laughed and then argued. The hands went away and they were gone. They were done. One man, short, fat, and self-satisfied, seemed especially pleased as he walked up. The others laughed and clapped him on the back. Satisfied smiles, money exchanged and pocketed. The auctioneer jabbed at a young boy hanging back behind the platform. He was dressed in breeches and a shirt, much like some of the men in the back of the crowd. Apunta tú ahí, la negra Pola, now property of Don Sicayo Duchesne, master of Hacienda Paraíso. Next, the boy scribbled something on a long piece of paper, and then it was over. Now Pola's chains were replaced by thick ropes around her wrists. The man bought 5 Africans that day. As he watched, they were pulled up into a wagon. His white shirt stretched across his ample belly and shone in the sun. His tightly woven straw hat covered most of his long hair, which brushed his collar. His dark mustache framed thin lips, and his pointy white teeth bit down hard on his cigar as he took charge of his new possessions. She did not know it then, but he had bought her as he would buy a breeding mare. Her true nightmare was just about to begin. Thank you.
Dahlma has such a soothing voice, and yet what you're reading is like her stomach is not in the same place as it was when we walked into this room, right? And those of you who have read her work know that the power of her word and descriptive passages are a trademark actually in your writing, which is very, very emotional and unsettling, but also very crafty, skillful, and gifted. And we can feel those ancestors behind her. We can feel that, right, when we read your work. And so I wanted just to go over just a brief question so that we can turn it over to the audience, and students are here also who I'm sure will have a lot to say and want to talk to you. And most of the questions that I had, you kind of answered in your introduction and in the reading, but so I wanted to get back to the process of writing, right? Your process. We have people in the audience, both students and colleagues who write and publish. And what is your routine? Do you have a routine? Do you have a structured way of going about writing? Does it come more organically to you? How did you first begin the process and how have you continued?
Okay, I was an English teacher for 30 years, and for 30 years I drilled into my students, you must have an outline. You must have a plan. You have to know where you're going before you start. When I tried to do that, it was a total failure. And the first lesson is not everybody writes the same way. Everybody has their own gift that comes to them in their own way. So for me, I get up at, well, lately it's been 2 or 3, but usually 4 in the morning. I live in New York City, which is not the quietest place in the world, although our neighborhood is fairly quiet. But I like to get up before the world is up because it's my time. There's nobody calling, nobody's gonna ring the doorbell. It's my time that I can use any way I want. And I begin by meditating. I light candles and incense. And I learn how to still my mind. I believe that my stories come from my ancestors who never got to tell the stories themselves. And so I become an antenna for images that come to me. When I finish meditating, I open my journal and I write my images down. I wish I had brought a journal, I didn't think to do it, but so I do not write sequentially, I write what comes to me. Later on, I realize the sequence of things. Sometimes what I write will not end up in the final book at all, but I have to go through it, right? When writing A Woman of Endurance, I had all these women characters in my mind, and during one meditation session, a male voice turned up. And he introduced himself, my name is Simon, and I'm going to be in your book, but I will speak directly to the reader, you will stay out of the way, and you will write down what my story is, not what you think my story is. So I got up and by this point, I knew that if I forced the writing, it was gonna be terrible. I didn't know how to write in the voice of a 19th century, in this case, Muslim man. Of course, my husband says that if I had not met him, Simon would not exist because he's a wonderful model for this great character. And he may be right, I'm not gonna say that. But anyway, I don't know where Simon came from. I don't care where Simon came from. What I care is that his story is authentic enough that the reader can accept it, right? So whether I understood him initially or not is irrelevant, right? Because my job was to pass him on to you. So sometimes things like that happen. Other times I get so involved in the story that I make myself sick. And so there's one scene, which is a torture scene, and I wrote it, and when I finished writing it, I thought, damn, that's good, right? And then I started throwing up, and I didn't stop throwing up for 3 days. I ended up in the hospital, right? So my message to all of you who are writers, at whatever stage you are, is that you cannot convince a reader of a world that you do not inhabit to a certain degree, right? You have to believe it to make me believe it, right? And sometimes there's a price to be paid. The question is, do you want to pay that price? Sometimes the price is your own emotional well-being. sometimes the price is someone else. For instance, in my first book, I wrote about a character who was in my family, and the person's, I didn't think the person's daughter could read English, but she did. She was bilingual. And she said, ay, esa vieja, que antipática era. And meanwhile, I had, modeled this particular character after her mom. So you gotta be careful, make sure that things aren't too transparent, because they'll come back at you. But the short answer is, I get up very early, I write, I don't know what is going to come out. I know I have to write it down, and eventually I will know.
I had a question actually about the very emotional passages that you include, and for you to admit that it's a kind of very visceral connection to your own body, your own well-being. And I think that in many ways writing is very therapeutic for many of us, but it is also it's a beating sometimes that people take, and those of you who write can probably comment on this.
The other thing is that you may be writing something very authentic to you, but very offensive to someone else, right? So you have to be willing to deal with that. Especially if you're writing memoir, stuff comes up in families that not everybody wants to or is ready to look at, So you have to decide how you're going to deal with that. I ramble, I'm sorry, I ramble.
No, the emotional connection, and how do you deal with that actually when because the funny thing is that family, you can be in the same family unit, but people will remember things differently, right? Not necessarily in the same light. They don't see it in the same light, even if it was the same event that everyone experienced.
Absolutely.
So how do you deal with that backlash if someone comes up to you?
Well, when I started writing Daughters of the Stone, I thought I was writing a memoir, my family's voyage, right? And I started writing, and I started giving things to people to read, and said, mira, eso no pasó así. Oh, okay. Then I hadn't written anything about my mother because I was very close to her. And when I gave her things to read, finally she said, bueno, y tú escribes de todo el mundo y de mí. Y yo, ¿qué? Pinté la pared. And so she took offense that I had not included her in my narrative. I had not included her in my narrative because I was too close to her. So I said, okay, this is not memoir, this is fiction. I told everybody in the whole family, I am writing fiction, no busquen a nadie que no lo van a encontrar. But my uncle sat down with the book and he wrote down the name of every character to find out who in the family was this person. Y quién era este, quién era el otro. Ay, Dios mío, mándame. So I decided, that's it, no memoir for me. I'm making the whole thing up. But the reality is, all of you who are writers know that the people in your life enter your writing, one way or the other, whether you think they do or not. Sometimes you write something and you think it's one thing, and everybody else sees right through you. It's like you're standing there naked, and they can see I said it, tú, ¿verdad? It's like, no, esa no soy. No, yo sé que I said it, tú, yo sé. So you have to be ready for whatever comes your way, and you have to learn how to be very diplomatic. But be true to yourself, because you've been given a gift, and you have a responsibility to that gift. To not only say it, write your story, but to be the best at doing that as possible. To learn craft, to learn how to tell a story to touch someone else. When I was a child, my grandmother and her friends sat in the balcony and they were telling stories. I learned more from them than from academia. I learned how to hold back information to increase tension, right? I learned how to leave things out that don't go with the point that I'm trying to make. So if you're trying to write a character who's obnoxious, you can't start by having her hold a baby, right? Those two things are going to knock together. So you have to figure out how to write conflicting scenes, how to make characters interesting and compelling. With Paula, she was obnoxious in the first book, but in the second book, you feel for her. You know, you have her reina del corazón, you know, because her experience, her life experience was so brutal that you can understand why she was so angry, right? She was angry because she was being treated like an animal. And she nearly died as a result of it. So you can understand why she was pissed off, right?
The progression of your work is also quite stunning. You do start with that kind of ancestral past, but especially in Daughters of the Stone, it's like a generation of 5 generations of women. So you bring the generation all the way up to the present. And in Carissa, she's actually a student she tried to come right to the University of Puerto Rico, and she ends up in Africa, right, on her voyage to Africa, the motherland, as she feels that she has to go down. So it's not only about that ancestral past, but also understanding how that ancestral past brings us to what we have today. But to make that voyage, you have a powerful, I feel, connection to that trajectory. And what I wanted to ask is, you did speak about it a bit in the presentation. What type of research do you do to develop these characters and develop these plots? You mentioned that Daughters of the Stone is more of a novel of plot, right, and events, and A Woman of Endurance is a novel of character development. So what type of research do you conduct, or how do you prepare for these, to write these scenes and these characters?
When I started traditional research methods, right? So I would go to the history books, I would Google stuff, I would go to archives. And what I found was that most of the people who wrote those things, as I said, were the elite, were the conquerors, right? So I couldn't trust what they were saying. And there was no other voice to counter it. So I had to come to Puerto Rico many times and talk to the oldest people that I could find and ask them about their grandparents and their grandparents. ¿Y qué le pasó a este? ¿Cómo se hacía aquello? And I found, you know, the stereotypical image of Puerto Rican women and Latino women in general in the past has been that they're very malleable, that the men are dominant, that the women have no power, that they go along with whatever the men say. I think even if that were true, it has changed. But I think from my looking at my family and my grandmother and my great-grandmother, that wasn't true for them. The men dealt with the outside world, right? What happened in the house was always in the hands of the women, which means that they were in control of all the children, male and female. And at least in my family, there was a whole level of communication going on with the women that the men did not participate in. Ay, deje esa mujer que esa está loca, you know? And so I never saw women as weak, never. They had a different kind of strength. And that was never shown on the page in my research. So pretty soon I decided, okay, so you have a foundation, now go talk to somebody who really knows something about it. I talked to people in Loíza, I talked to people in Piñones, I talked to people in Carolina, I talked to people in go through Carolina and the other side is
Canóvanas.
No, it's further south, something alto.
Trujillo
Anyway.
Alto.
Trujillo Alto. So I talked to everybody who I could find, who were old enough to know the world before I did, or who knew it differently. I lived in Puerto Rico 2 years as a child, but those 2 years made such an impression on me. I was a magnet collecting information that now is coming back to me. And so a lot of my work is based not just on the traditional research tools, because a lot of them were not reliable, but on oral histories and family histories. And, one time I was sitting in a carro público, and somebody was asking me what I was doing, and I said, well, I'm a writer and I'm writing about this, and he said, yo soy ingeniero, yo te puedo decir de esto. So even when I wasn't asking for information, the information came to me. And so I just feel like the universe, including our ancestors, are more present than what we realize.
I have so many questions and I could literally talk to you for hours and days, perhaps even years. So I want to turn it over to the public though, our audience, and see if you have any questions for Dahlma, any comments about her work, those of you who have read the work, or just questions in general for our speaker today.
Hi.
For me, I'm curious about the nature in your writing, because I see with a woman of endurance, I see that the nature is very special to Paula, and she finds a kind of freedom in there. And I'm just curious what it means to you, the nature in your writing.
There's a very strong vein of traditional African religion in my work, and that is based on nature. So for instance, in the first book, each book has its own orisha, its own goddess or god. So the first book, it was Oshun, and Oshun is the goddess of the rivers, and the plantation was near a river, and she's also the goddess of sexuality and procreation and all of that. And each orisha is attached to a natural force. So nature will always be there, and nature will always be in Puerto Rico. I was amazed when I came after Maria that el suelo, the earth itself was regenerating immediately. So even though it took people a longer time to, I'm not gonna say recover, because I don't think that the island is still recovered, but to begin to regenerate, nature immediately began to regenerate. So for me, Puerto Rico is a place of regeneration, of natural, I think that if we look at nature, we learn a lot. And I think that's reflected in my writing. That coming from a person who grew up in New York City, cement surrounding me, right?
Another question?
Yes.
¿Quién le diseñó la portada?
Discover. The cover for A Woman of Endurance.
Yeah.
Her name is Fabiola Jean-Pierre? Jean-Louis. She is a Haitian paper sculptor. This dress is paper. And when I had a party for the first book, it was in a place where there was a gallery across the hall. And the gallery were all her dresses.
Yeah.
And this was one of them, and this work was hanging there. And I think it's the perfect cover for this book.
Yes.
Starting from the back of, she's got this elaborate dress, which is beautiful, but if you look at the back of it, it looks like scarification.
Yes.
And she was beaten, so.
Yeah. The reflections.
And the photograph in front of her is a very famous photograph of a man who's beaten and he has that scarification on his back. And for me, the symbol is that it doesn't matter how many years have gone by. If the wound is not treated, it will stay there, it will be a scar, and it will infect the entire body. And so I feel in Puerto Rico as well as in the United States, until we deal with the issue of racism, the society is at risk. Because you cannot progress when you have an infection. And we have not dealt with the infection. Okay, that's it, that's my political.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Who was your inspiration behind Matthie's character in Daughters of the Stone?
Matthie's character in Daughters of the Stone. It wasn't one person, it was a collection of very strong women that I knew. My grandmother, in fact, my grandmother died while I was writing about Mattie, and I couldn't write for 3 years because I had to deal with the grief of it. But I think she's a composite of these very strong women that preceded me in my line. They were not educated women, they were not sophisticated women. They were women of the earth, and that's what they gave me and all my other cousins, were a certain grounding, you know. I know that in English the word proud is a negative thing, but in my family it was usted tiene orgullo de ser quien es, you know, and that grounds you. You are who you are, and the longer you're around, the stronger that tree grows, you know. And so trees are really important to me. So when Paula finds a tree in the forest, like, that's really important to me. That tree is really important to me.
Hi. Was there a particular story that stood out to you when researching with people you spoke with in the island?
Mm-hmm.
Like hearing that from like their perspective and their own family history, was there a particular story that stood out to you and that you included, or maybe you didn't choose to include in the book?
Right. The story that made me sick is a story that I was told by a friend of mine who is a white Puerto Rican whose great-great-grandfather was a slave owner. And he told her that when pregnant enslaved women were disciplined, they had to dig a hole in the ground and put her face down so they wouldn't damage the product of her womb and still discipline her. So that scene where that happens was directly from my talk with my friend. And one of the things that I had to deal with early on is, okay, some of the people you know today are offspring of people who owned my people. How do I deal with that? So that's a secondary question.
Thank you.
Comments, I'm just going to say a comment.
Okay.
For me, I just retired and
Me too.
yes. And I'm just coming back to the University of Puerto Rico, which I graduated from. And it's a pleasure for me to see students that are so eager to talk and get to know a person like you. I feel like the way that you have exposed today your whole journey, so down to earth, without any pretension, that doesn't happen too often in the academia. And I really, really value that. I also value the fact that the translation of the book, I love the word indomita versus
Yes.
women of endurance. I really love that word. It really called my attention when I saw the book. I was referred to you through a friend of yours, and this has been a feast. And I really hope that the University of Puerto Rico brings you again, but to tell the story in Spanish. To not only our students here, but the students in the schools, because we don't hear that here. And I think in our own voice, and I'm sure the way that you have conveyed the information, it doesn't matter si metemos la pata en español o la metemos, pero que lo digamos en español, because I think your story is so valuable and so, it really, really touches my heart. I have worked in New York for 41 years after leaving Puerto Rico, and I know when you express yourself about why you write, my daughter had experienced that. She had to convince people that she was worthy, and I really loved it. I hope you polish it. Thank you.
Well, it's on my website.
Oh, great.
So you can let her know.
I will.
Thank you so much for your.
Perhaps one last question?
Oh, now we got two.
We have
Yeah,
two?
yeah.
Okay, two quick questions.
Hi, I just wanted to ask what inspired you to write the first chapter in A Woman of Endurance, because not a lot of authors start like that. So,
Oh, okay, what do you mean by that?
like they don't start with like, oh, the character almost died. Like it's never. It's usually like in the middle of the story to just like create that tension, but never in the beginning. So I just was wondering what inspired you to do that and why.
Okay. I write in the way that I like to read. So I look at the first chapter before I decide I'm going to read this, 400-page book. There are three things I need to know. Who's the main character? So I need an introduction to the main character, an introduction to the setting so I know where I am, and an introduction to the conflict. Where is this going? Why do I want to read this? And hopefully get you to get to the end of the chapter and say, wait a minute, I gotta keep reading. I gotta find out what happens, Other people said yes, also that they thought that she was gonna die. Well, if I kill her off on the first chapter, that's the end of the book. But I'm glad that it worked for you. And Senor.
I was wondering if there's any comment, review, feedback that has stuck. Oh, sorry. Hello. I was wondering if there was any comment, review, or feedback that has shocked you the most about your writing that you have published.
Good, I had that in my questions, I'm glad you asked. Memorable moment.
I've had good and bad, okay? I had one young man raise his hand and say, why do you keep writing about the past? I'm here today, I need to know about today. I don't want to know about slavery anymore, enough about that already. And I said, well, okay, first of all, I said to myself, okay, Dahlma, take a breath before you answer this question. So I said to him, sweetheart, I know that I'm not writing about hip hop and cell phones and all of that. I don't know anything about that. I am very honest about what I can and cannot do. However, that world, the world of today and the world of tomorrow, belongs to you. You need to write about that. You are the best expert about that, not me, right? I write what came before you because you do not stand on air. You stand on a foundation. That's my job. I'm the past. You're the present and the future. And that's the best I could give him. And I've learned how to be very diplomatic. How many of you are writing or would like to write or would like to get published? Okay, just be brave, raise your hand. Oh, okay, thank you. What I want to say to you is, I started writing when I was in high school. I was told that I was not college material. And my mother, when I got home and I said, Mami, no van a mandar la solicitud porque I'm not college material. And she said to me, Nena, the question is not whether or not you're going to college. The question is, which college are you going to go to? Which is why I say, I don't know any meek women in my family, so my mother went to school. And they sent my application to another college that they thought I might be able to get through. But I tell you that story to tell you that, especially in the publishing world today, the doors are not open to us, right? We are not the standard writer, right?
Yeah.
You have got to believe it in your heart and your soul that you are a writer. Not, I like to write. No, I'm a writer. I'm an emerging writer. I'm an unpublished writer, perhaps. Or maybe I have been published, but my big chance hasn't come up yet. We have got to have confidence that we have as much to offer to the world as anybody else, and perhaps more, right? And so you are writers. You are in different places in your voyage. Maybe my voyage, I'm farther down the road than you, but you are my future. So you must write, okay? Start by writing and giving it to your local group, and then start spreading out, okay? And our stories are important, they're valuable, be authentic, and write your butt off. Just write.
So let me give you a big round of in some of Dahlma's presentations, she has had wonderful ceremonies of blessings, right? People come up to bless her and bless her work. And what I would like to do with students here as well, colleagues and friends and family members, is I would like to bestow on you none other than the tower of our university in miniature form, so that you can carry it with you, so that you know that we love your work, we love you. We are so grateful that you are here, and that we will keep your words in our hearts, in our heads, and we will start writing. Some of the students will join her tomorrow for a writing workshop. And so wherever you see this pen, this tower, remember this moment and how special it has been for us to listen to you today.
Thank you so much. Boy, I'm gonna be showing my chest.
And thank you.
I didn't mean it that way.
The husband is protesting. So, thank you so much.
I have to go, but if you wanna hang out and talk a little bit, I'll be.
And there are flyers here, there are bookmarks that she has graciously brought. Please take one and thank Dahlma. Thank you so much and have a great day. And everyone, go on with your other classes for the day. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Oh, sign it. If people want to sign it.
Oh, if you have a book and you want me to sign it, please.
¿Tomaste foto? Sí, tomé foto. Dame. Bien. Nomás como tu mujer te me lo mandó. Es verdad. Y yo solo diciendo los días, le enviaste la foto a yo. Ay, no.
How's your wrist?
Oh, and that'll work. It's yeah. It's a computer. I gotta get away from the computer.
No, I get certain during the pandemic, just from all that time on Zoom, I realized my shoulders started to hurt.